So, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this panel on development of the North for the people of the North. My name is Rasmus Bertelsen. I teach international relations at Aalborg University in Denmark. Arctic studies, North Atlantic studies are a big interest to me. My background is that I'm a Danish political scientist who grew up in Iceland, and therefore I, of course, have a deep personal and professional interest in Denmark's historical, current, and future relations with the North Atlantic. Because, as you know, Iceland was part of the Kingdom of Denmark for hundreds of years, gained independence in the early 20th century. The Faroe Islands and Greenland are still parts of the Kingdom of Denmark on a trajectory to independence. And therefore, what we're going to talk about this afternoon is very interesting because for Arctic communities to have the highest level of well-being, the highest level of human development, and the highest level of self-determination, whether they pursue formal self-determination or whether they just want to increase the autonomy of their control of their own lives. I think there's a term in Arctic human development circles called fate control. Therefore, for local communities in the Arctic to benefit from development of the Arctic is very important. We have today talked a lot about energy resources in the Arctic, and the Russian senior Arctic official, Ambassador Vasilyev, I think his name was, mentioned the enormous importance of Russian Arctic energy resources for the Russian economy. But I think what we should talk about this afternoon is how these energy resources in the north can be for the benefit of local communities, indigenous communities and northerners. My own field of research is very much on the intersection of human capital and natural resources, because it's my professional belief that the precondition for northern communities to really benefit from their natural resources is human capital. That it's not enough to simply get a check in the mail for the rents for your natural resources. It's also crucial that the community has the skills, the human capital, to fill the good jobs, so that people really have good lives, good jobs, good income, and that skills and savings stay in the community. So I look very much forward to hear the views of the panelists on development of the North for the people of the North. We have a very interesting panel this afternoon. We have Dr. Geneviève Carr from Northern Petroleum and Mineral Resources Branch, Aboriginal Affairs and Northern Development, Canada. And I'm going to ask the speakers to introduce themselves briefly. We have Gary Isaacson from ExxonMobil in the United States, and Embla Eid Oddsdottir from the Icelandic Arctic Cooperation Network. So we have people from government, we have people from industry, and we have people from the academic field. And we were hoping to have Andrei Yakolev from the Murmansk Regional Public Organization Association of Kola Sami. But we seem to have lost Andrei, so we hope that he turns up. But let's get started, and we'll just go in the order of the program. So, Geneviève, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And I just about started by saying good morning, and it is morning in Canada, so good morning and good afternoon in Iceland. It's a pleasure to be here. I've just been asked to introduce myself. I work with the Department of Aboriginal Affairs and Northern Development Canada, with the Government of Canada. I am a manager of research and environment in the Northern Petroleum Resources Directorate. And my role has evolved in some ways to broker or advocate for research needs and related to the social and natural environment as it relates to oil and gas resources. I have colleagues in the mineral resources side who do similar types of activities for mineral resource development in Canada's north. But my responsibility is focused entirely on Canada's north. I come to this role with no expertise. I have considerable expertise, so just trust me, please. I come to this role as trained as an aquatic ecologist in southern Canada, but I think what that allows me to do is talk to research scientists, and eventually, as my role is developed, to begin to talk to northern communities, northern organizations, Aboriginal organizations, and hear the conversation about what the priorities are to ensure that resource development and petroleum resource development is undertaken in as safe and secure a manner as possible. So trust me. If I squint, I'm sorry, it's hard to see you. So it's not a reflection on my attitude, it's just that it's hard to see. We've heard today several times, many times, and I'm sure we will as the week progresses, that the Arctic is rich in petroleum resources, in natural resources, also in mineral resources, but as Rasmus said, also in human resources, if you will. And these resources present from the petroleum resources both an opportunity and a challenge. This is true on the Pan-Arctic scale, and it's also true on the Canadian scale. And today what I'd like to speak to you about is my approach, the approach that Canada and my department in particular is taking to engage Northerners and Aboriginals in resource development, in petroleum resource development, and look at the considerations that we're bringing forth as we try to engage all of our stakeholders in this. My focus today is going to be on a specific example that we're working on in the Eastern Arctic. And I haven't prepared a presentation, because I wanted to keep this as open as possible and hopefully generate a few questions that will drive a conversation down the road, I hope. So again, my focus is on the Eastern Arctic, and in particular some considerations and some thinking that we're doing around some strategic environmental assessment for Baffin Bay and Davis Strait, which is east of Baffin Island and shares a boundary with the boundary of Greenland. And so there's Greenland, of course, shares Baffin Bay with us, or we share it with them. In terms of responsibilities, Patrick Borbet this morning explained to you that we have separated the regulatory responsibilities from the licensing responsibilities. And the department that I work with is responsible for issuing licenses, and therefore we're the landowner or the resource owner in the north, in our frontier lands as they're designated in legislation. We have responsibility for the northern offshore area, as well as lands in Nunavut and in the Northwest Territories. With just a footnote that in the Northwest Territories, that responsibility will be devolved to the territorial government effective April 1st of next year, which is a whole other interesting conversation, and I think you'll hear a bit about that as the week progresses. In terms of regulating operations related to oil and gas, that is the responsibility of the National Energy Board. So sometimes, colloquially, I describe our responsibility as a bit the money people. We handle the licensing and the land sales, and the National Energy Board are the safety people in terms of ensuring that the operations are as safe and secure as both for individuals, for humans, human safety and environmental protection. So I've already explained to you that my decision, the discussion will be on Baffin Bay. Let me give you a bit of background in terms of what we already have to set the stage a little bit for Baffin Bay. So this is a region that's within federal jurisdiction. There has been no modern rights issuance in the region. And as well, there has been very little historical exploration for oil and gas in that region. There were 3 wells drilled in the 1970s, and 1 significant discovery license was issued in the 1970s, and stands. There is still 1 tiny dot in Baffin Bay that is held by a company as a significant discovery, but there is no production and no current exploration in the region. There is interest in the region, though, and Greenland has been quite active in recent years in terms of issuing exploration licenses. And I don't believe there was drilling this summer, but there was last summer in Baffin Bay on the Greenlandic side. And there is production and exploration to the south of Baffin Bay off of the shores of Labrador, which is not considered Arctic, but nevertheless a harsh environment. And and sort of paints a picture that around the edges, if you will, of Baffin Bay, there is interest in the area, or of the Canadian Baffin Bay. I say there's no exploration currently in the region on the Canadian side, but there is interest. There's a multi-client investment application that's in front of the National Energy Board right now to conduct some 2D seismic or speculative seismic to get some idea of what the resource potential is in the area. The area is sparsely populated. It borders or bounds the territory of Nunavut. And there are several communities on Baffin Island and just to the north as well that have a little to no experience with oil and gas activities in the region. The Nunavut itself is covered by a comprehensive land claim that was signed some time ago. I should know, sorry. But that brings with it some responsibilities and some rights to the land claimants in the region. The boundaries of that comprehensive land claim extend 12 nautical miles off of the shores of Baffin Land, and then beyond that, it's clearly federal jurisdiction. The interpretation of the land claim, there is sometimes cause for Aboriginal people under the land claim to have to be able to enjoy rights beyond that 12 nautical mile limit, but it is primarily a federal jurisdiction. Partly as a result of the land claim, but also a result of the individuals, I think more directly a result of the individuals there. The people who live in these communities are primarily Inuit, and they have a strong desire, a passion, and a very strong focus to protect the resources around them and to maintain a traditional way of living. These are people who live not exclusively, but largely on what is offered to them from marine resources, the fish and the marine mammals that are there. And they have a strong interest and desire to be a part of any conversation around activity and development in the region. The issue at hand now is how we can develop informed and balanced recommendations to my minister, the Minister of Aboriginal Affairs and Northern Development, regarding opening the region or potentially opening the region to licensing for oil and gas exploration. We, of course, have to adhere to the requirements of the land claims, but I think our experience in other parts of Canada's north and our ongoing relationships that we build and continually maintain with Aboriginal organizations across the north demonstrate to us that we have to go beyond simply adhering to the requirements of the land claim and actually developing productive and meaningful relationships and buy-in with the people who live in the regions. What we are proposing to do, and we are very much in the infancy, we are just beginning we're beginning to have conversations with our stakeholders, and those are stakeholders across the federal government, the territorial government, as well as the Nunavut. The Nunavut is the territorial government, but as well as the Inuit organizations that were established as part of the land claim. We are beginning to engage these organizations in the development of a strategic environmental assessment for the region. This is something that there is a directive that for any policy decision, such as the opening of an area for the issuance of rights or for land sales, there is a directive within the federal government that a strategic assessment must be made to consider all of the potential environmental impacts of this decision. But we have the flexibility and the full intention to develop this into a much broader initiative that really engages the people in the north. We hope to build ownership among our stakeholders, and we hope to do that in several different ways, and perhaps ways that are a bit different than some of the strategic environmental assessments that we've seen in other parts of the north, although I'm very interested in hearing and learning about experiences from other parts of the north. We want to develop an understanding of the richness that exists in this part of Canada. And to do so, we are proposing to undertake a type of cross-cultural exchange where we conduct perhaps what is the more traditional scientific review of what we understand of the resources, and that's both the petroleum resources, but of course also the resources associated and tied to the natural environment. But we have heard and we believe that there is a strong traditional knowledge or Inuit knowledge component of this that can contribute to our understanding of the region. And so through this cross-cultural exchange, we hope to have, if parallel process that converge towards the end in terms of the interpretation of the wealth and the richness of the region. We intend to build capacity to be able to have this conversation. What I indicated earlier on, that these communities have no modern experience of oil and gas exploration in the region, and yet a very strong passion for the resources that are there. What seems to be the case is that we need to just be able to develop within the communities some understanding of what it means to consider issuing rights in the region, and how that will unfold in the region. It doesn't, I think many people here would appreciate that it doesn't mean that if we issue rights today, tomorrow you'll see a drill rig rumbling up to start drilling in the offshore area. This is something that takes place over decades, and there are many checks and balances along the way to ensure both the safety of humans and the environment. Nevertheless, the ability to have that conversation requires, if you will, an oil and gas 101 be brought to the communities. But there's a flip side to that, and then that we have, that people like me who are not from the north also learn from the people who live there and who understand the resources well. And so, if you will, an Inuit Knowledge 101 is something that I think is required of myself and the colleagues who are working with me on this. So that is what I mean by a cross-cultural exchange. I think that the scientific review and the review from traditional ways of knowing will allow us to eventually consider, as we progress over the next 2 to 3 to possibly 4 years, to eventually consider if it's the appropriate time to begin issuing licenses in the region. And if so, how do we do that? And you can imagine a number of different scenarios, and we don't have the answer at this stage. The answer might be it is not the right time. The environment, it's too risky. There's too many uncertainties. There's too strong a desire to protect the natural resources that are there. It might be absolutely open up the whole area to licensing and exploration. Or it might be something somewhere in between. It might be that we will open different regions of Baffin Bay and Davis Strait at different times to test the waters, to see if there's industry uptake for the area. And so we think that the outcome of this study will lead us to those recommendations that we can then provide to our minister. One component that I haven't discussed is the demonstration in terms of this oil and gas 101 that I was talking about, is talking about not just the risks but also the potential benefits, and I think that's maybe where Rasmus was partially thinking in terms of benefits to communities. And there are the rents that are paid, that may be paid to communities, but then there's also the opportunities for training, for employment in the region, and possibly some other benefits that communities might wish to have a voice in making recommendations in terms of what types of benefits they wish to see if and when this type of activity unfolds over the next several decades. I think that if we understand the richness, I think we've identified the responsibility to both engage to make a rational and coherent recommendation on the federal side, but that we also have a responsibility to engage our stakeholders at multiple levels, from the community level all the way up to the federal level and back down again. So I think there is a balance of richness and responsibility, and hopefully that by building the capacity within the communities and within the territory and even among our federal partners to participate in the policy decision around strategic environmental assessment and eventual rights issuance down the road, that we're building some resistance within the system that will allow us resilience within the system that will allow us to adapt to change as it comes. And with that, I'll wrap up. Thank you very much.